So today we're gonna interview the former pastor Art Smith. Hi, my name's Teresa.
Teresa, good to meet
Hello.
you.
So in the paper it says that um you came into the Woodlawn community and was a part of a Woodlawn Ministerial Alliance. Could you just tell me what that is, please?
Well, let me just go back to when I came into the community. I was called as pastor of this church, First Presbyterian Chicago, in the spring of 1976. And my family and I moved into the area, and I began serving as pastor at that time. I found out, or I was aware, that there was a group called the Woodlawn Ministerial Alliance that had been very active in the neighborhood during the 60s. In fact, they were one of the groups that helped bring TWO, the Woodlawn organization, into being. But in the time after that creation of TWO, the alliance had changed and some of the pastors had left the area, and there was just really nothing organized at that point. And so I helped kind of reestablish the Woodlawn Ministerial Alliance. And by the time we kind of got reorganized, there were about 10, maybe 12 churches that were active in that group. And the ministers would get together once a month and talk about issues in the neighborhood and things that we could do to help the residents. And by the mid 80s, we realized that one of the major issues in the neighborhood was that there wasn't enough food. Well, there weren't enough jobs either, but food was an issue. So we established the Food for Life program in the spring of 1983, and that still continues here with volunteers from all over the city.
So, well, did it ever like did it ever good anything ever bad happen during that time? Like
Well,
while it was
what do you
going
mean
on?
by bad?
Like anything
Murders, things like
yeah.
that? Yes. The first month or so, maybe the first 2 months I was here, I was in the office and paperwork, whatever was going on, and one of the young men who was a member of the congregation came running in the building, and he said, "Reverend, you got to come." And I went, "Ooh, what's going on?" And he brought me out, and we went over to Woodlawn and where Campbell Apartment is over here, the one block over. And at that time, there was a real tall building, about 12 stories high. It was called the Wedgwood. And the reason it was called the Wedgwood, it was the shape of a big wedge, a big triangle. And it was what they call a single residency occupancy building, an SRO. It was about 12 stories high, and it turned out that what this young man in our church had alerted me to was a young girl about 8 years old had either been pushed or jumped, and she was on the concrete, very dead. And so we went over there and talked to the family, and then all of a sudden the police and the fire and everybody came. So that was kind of my first real bad experience of watching a young girl die on the streets.
So did they ever find out who did it or what
No,
happened?
it was one of those things that just it happened, and I never saw any final report or any information about whether she was pushed or she fell. I never got any further information. A lot of things like that happen in this neighborhood, and they still do, I think. Though I'm not involved as much as I was when I was here at full time. But some bad things happen, and they just kind of get smoothed over, and people walk away.
So why did you choose this community?
Well, that's a good question. Whether I chose it or it chose me, I'm not sure. I had done extensive urban church work in Camden, New Jersey, for about 3 years when I was in seminary. And then I was overseas in Scotland, in the area outside Glasgow, which is a very urban industrial area. And so I'd always been interested in how the church related to its community, particularly an urban, intensely urban area. And so when this opportunity came up, I interviewed and they liked me, and I said, well, this is a challenge and it's not going to be easy, but we decided, my family and I, to say yes and move in, and we spent almost 12 years here.
So, were there any dislikes that you had before you came? Well, when you came over here, were there any likes or dislikes that you had?
Well, I was born in the city of Chicago, so Chicago was always kind of been my home. And though I went away to college and seminary and so forth, so I had always liked the city of Chicago, and I was familiar with what this church had done over the years, when it became an integrated church, and then when it began to work with the Blackstone Rangers. So I was aware of the programs of the church, though I wasn't, I was at a distance, kind of outside looking in. And what I saw from the distance, I was pleased with. I thought those were good things that the church was doing. And when I had the opportunity to be the pastor, it made sense for me to say yes and pick up the challenge.
So, with the things going on today, how do you feel about the violence that's going on around with the children being killed and the police doing?
Uh, I'll give you a long answer, I guess. After I left here in the mid-'80s, 87 or so, when I retired as pastor of this church, I decided to take on another challenge. And for 2 years, I ran the program. We had a little office downtown on the Loop, the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence, which was, it still is, an organization in the city which addresses the issue of handguns. And we work very closely with the police and with community groups, and also a lot of political work in Springfield during the legislative session to try to get more laws on the books to prevent easy access to handguns. And in the process, I got to know and spent a lot of time in public debate with people like representatives from the National Rifle Association. And that's a whole different world. Those people are zealots in terms of protecting their rights as they see it for guns. And now what's happened in the city of Chicago with the Supreme Court decision recently banning the law that Chicago had on the books for against handgun, easy access to handguns, a ban on handguns. We've gone backwards as a city. And in the 80s, when I was working in that issue, we thought it was uphill then, but it's worse now. I mean, there's so many guns on the street. It's just, there's more guns than water.
So, like, did it affect you personally?
Yeah, it gives, when you spend time, one of the things we did with the council against handgun violence, we provided a service to victims of families who had handgun violence. And once a month, we had a program over at Michael Reese Hospital where families, brothers, sisters, mothers, grandmothers, whatever, could come together and talk and just share with one another their experience. So I used to go to those meetings every month, and the stories were overwhelming. I mean, and these were people who had lost family members 10 years ago, and they were still grieving inside with the loss that they had experienced. And now that loss is magnified across the whole city, particularly in neighborhoods like Woodlawn, Englewood, and on the west side of Chicago.
So I have like three more questions. Wait, we gotta go for an hour. Hour? An hour? Okay. So when you, where did you live when you came to like?
We lived over we still live now, in Hyde Park. We found that our kids would be able to go to some pretty good, very good, put it that way, public schools. All three of my children went to Murray Academy, Language Academy, and then went to Kenwood and graduated from there. So we've been in the general area. At that time, we chose to live in Hyde Park because it would have been very difficult for us to move into Woodlawn at that time. And there wasn't a whole lot of housing that was available at that point either.
So around where you lived, were there any gang members or like violence? A lot of violence, like it is over here.
Uh, yes and no. It was considered, quote, safe, whatever safe may be. But there were incidents in our building. We in a three flat, and